The IPPAI's 12th Regulators and Policymakers Retreat aims to break down paradoxes of India as senior policy planners from the government, regulatory authorities and industry converge to discuss, debate and look for solutions to these challenges. We are back to Goa this week to bring you more insights and views. Welcome everyone. We're coming to you from the 12th Regulators and Policymakers Retreat 2011. We are of course going to be talking about a very interesting theme in today's discussion. Over the past few years, there's been tremendous focus on India's 8 to 9% growth rate. A lot of parts of the world, in fact, envy India's position, economically speaking. But there's also a fair amount of acceptance that says that, look, a lot of this growth comes from specific pockets or from specific sectors of the economy as well. Over the last few months, we've also heard from both central and state level politicians during, let's say, election rallies. There's this one catchphrase that always seems to ring through, and that's inclusive growth. So what really is inclusive growth? How can India aspire to it? And which are those sectors that we can continue to rely on to try and build up the momentum on inclusive growth? Let's introduce our panel that's here to discuss that very topic. With us today, we've got Mr. Devdutt Pattanaik, Chief Belief Officer at Future Group. Thanks for being here. Mr. H.M. Nerurkar is the Managing Director at Tata Steel. Thank you, sir. Dilip Chenoy joins us. He's the MD and CEO of the National Skill Development Corporation. And I'd like to once again welcome onto the panel Shoma Chaudhury, the Managing Editor at Tehelka. Thank you. Let's get this started by first, in fact, Shoma, I'll come to you right at the top. I want to get a sense from you whether you truly believe that there is a correct or a wholesome understanding of that word, inclusive. Do you think that exists in the country? Do you think people understand what the objective should be?
I think there is a misunderstanding about what inclusiveness means, because when we speak about inclusiveness, it's always about bringing the entire swath of India into urbanized sectors or into the growth pattern that we have decided today as being a historical inevitability. You know, we have to rethink this. You know, we have Stiglitz saying we have to rethink the idea of growth. None of which is to take away wealth creation. None of which is to take away entrepreneurship. But it is to just create a more plural idea of what is inclusive, what is well-being, what is wealth, you know, and what is, but we can't take away ideas of what is excellence or what is attitudes that lead to excellence. We certainly need to think about more ways of creating development and wealth and well-being in the agricultural sectors or the craft sectors or the non-organized sectors.
Mr. Nerurkar, let me ask you this. When it comes to the onus on corporate India to take forward the inclusive growth story, do you think it's a little unfair to say that, look, we should have that much reliance on corporate India to do this?
There is a will to do things differently, there is a passion to do things. One can achieve many things. Like, just to give an example, even on education or skill development, there are various ways in which one can work. There is one strata of the society which requires just employability and some very basic training which is in the form of vocations, you know, masons, electricians, etc. On the other hand, there can be another level where you want a technically empowered manpower. Same is the case in terms of health. After all, you don't have to do anything fantastic, but if you can do something on just drinking water and basic qualities of health, you can achieve a lot. Now, corporate India has a lot of wherewithal in terms of talent which it has with us. Only thing is, we need to reach out far more than what as a corporate we have been doing. I think that's really the lesson out of it. Because how much will you depend on the government?
Fair enough. And of course, even if we were to agree that, all right, you know what, let's leave it to the corporates because they can do this better than the government. If we were to all agree on that, who decides or who imposes how much corporates should do? Dilip, do you have any thoughts on this? I mean, should the Ministry of Corporate Affairs come in and say that, all right, X% of your revenues have to go towards not CSR but corporate citizenship?
Inclusiveness should be able to provide equal access, availability and affordability of a particular service or, you know, product to everybody, right? So if you take education or let's take healthcare, right? We are providing free healthcare, but if the cost of transportation is greater than the cost of free healthcare, it's got no meaning, right? So we're providing free education. So I think if you look at that and then you ask the question differently, look at the role of corporates. I think it's the ecosystem in which we need to create, you know, what are corporates all about? Entrepreneurship, right? Providing products or services at the least cost to people. making things available to the people where they want, when they want and how they want. So if you translate that into the things like education or health and say, how do we make, the current education system means you got to sit for an exam when we want you to. You got to study when we want you to. How about changing that? You can actually change it. And the models exist. So if we can bring in that sort of a culture and a corporate culture and deliver it across different types of things that we want to do, education, health, then that's the answer. It's not whether the corporates do it. It could be an NGO that does it. It could be an arm of the government that does it. But we need a plan and we need to execute the plan. I think the plans are there, execution is lacking. So if we get in a corporate type of execution and governance and responsibility and accountability, it can be done.
So even the management of these projects should be done differently is what you're saying. The other area which sort of tends to get sometimes forgotten, a lot of the gaps or a lot of the missing pieces of the puzzle are because of infrastructure problems as well. Devdutt, do you believe that infrastructure specifically is also an area that corporate India should start spending money on?
No, I think one has to ask more fundamental question. Why should I include? Is it because someone has told me to include people, or is it because I want to include people? Is it, if I say that I am going to include because you are telling me, or the government is telling me, or an editor of a magazine is telling me, then it's a prescriptive model. That means I am being prescribed and told what to do.
In a country like India, that works best sometimes.
No, you see, prescription is about domestication. I am domesticating you to do exactly what I want you to tell me. If you want to be voluntarily domesticated, that is great. But the question is, the other is the reflective model, where I have to ask myself, I want to include people. I want to help this country, and that's what we are talking about, the vision of the nation state, and these are the questions, because it's reflective, not prescriptive. Rules don't make you an honest person. You're an honest person, and rules are the hygiene that enable you to negotiate your will. So we have to ask ourselves whether infrastructure is required. Everything is an output. You don't begin with the output, you begin with the input. What is the input? It is about what people believe in. If people believe that I want to include people, and it's my growth lies in that as a human being, then everything will fall into place.
Well, when you're saying that as a society we should be left to be what we want to be rather than have prescriptions, I think that's again a fallacious position, because as a society, we can either be a very rapacious, cruel, feudal, dishonest, angry society, or we can be what we were in 1947, where idea of India was pushed onto us and we rose to the task because there was a prescriptive leadership that was giving us ideas that we would cleave to, Today when you have a more divisive idea put on us, we will cleave to that. Human material always operates in a climate of inspiration, or as I keep saying, a climate of what your framework is, If I'm told to be demonic, I will be demonic, but if I have a leader out there who tells me to be Krishna, I will be Krishna. So there has to be prescriptions. That is what creates collective societies,
Dilip.
If I just take your thing, I think the question is the problem. We can't deliver education in villages because no electricity, okay?
Or no roads to get to certain
electricity,
centers or
forget
whatever.
that. I'm just saying electricity, roads are taken. Solution. There are over 600 telecom towers in all of these villages which have a gen set and have, high bandwidth connectivity. So how do you take that opportunity and connect it to the needs of the village and create classrooms around it? So, sometimes we tend to look at only the problems.
And we miss the obvious.
We miss the solutions. I think we need to look at solutions and answers because we don't have time to keep debating the questions all over again.
Mr. Nerurkar, that statement that you quoted of Mr. Tata's, which said, that society is the purpose of industry. How do we inculcate that idea within corporate India, which, as even I think all of us here will agree, yes, there is a large section of corporate India that is only looking at profits, that is only looking at shareholder interest.
If you genuinely believe that the society around you actually helps you to grow, to conduct your business well, you will do that. If you go to, let's say, forget about Jamshedpur, which is a city, but even if you go to our remote areas in the mines or the collieries, the work which right from beginning, and I am again not talking of today, long time back, work what has been done in terms of health, sanitation and drinking water is what helps us today a lot. For example, we see in part of the eastern India many places where we have problems of left-wing extremists, people not allowing you to do work. We have not lost a single day because the society is with you. Secondly, the most important, as all of us are saying, is education. If you start schools by which at least people are having primary education, you have enabled them to look after themselves in times to come.
But should there be somebody telling the big corporate houses that this is what you should be doing, or that is
no,
how much you
nobody
should be
told
spending?
us. Nobody told us, and you don't have to be told. As I said, if you see that the need is there, and if you feel genuinely that you can make difference to the lives of the people, you must do it on your own. I mean, that's the way every individual or every corporate must think in that manner. That's the only thing I will say.
Shoma, it doesn't always happen like that.
I have two views on this. One is that I think people on the ground will force this onto corporates. You know, today almost every development project in India is stalled, not because of the whimsies of government, but because people are saying you can't do it this way, you know. And so I think the corporate practices will have to change from pressure from the ground. But I do believe, you know, we don't want government to be in, have any discretionary powers. We don't want them to be in the welfare schemes. We don't want them to be in governance. And now we don't even want them to be in policy. We want technocrats and bureaucrats to be doing it, or people from outside. Are we saying that we don't want government at all? You know, I don't think that's that's not a plausibility, because I'm saying that, you know, I believe there has to be prescription, there has to be fear, as much as there has to be a culture of you know, persuasion. Because the point is that there are too many corporate companies, particularly in certain sectors, which is education, which is infrastructure, and which is corporate enterprises which involve national resources, where there is just too much pillage going on in this country, you know. And if you're going to take it, then you have to be told on what conditions you can take it, in what proportion you can take it, and what are the circumstances in which you will give back to society. And as I was saying, to me it's much more important how you take from society than how you give back to it eventually, you know.
I think that's a good note to end on, because we've completely run out of time. But thank you to all the panelists, and that's where we'll end this session. But of course, there's more coming up after a very short break here. Welcome back. We now come to a very special session. There's a theme here that is gaining in relevance in corporate circles and government circles all over the world, and now here in India too. We're talking about the environment and just how relevant it is in terms of where we go from here as a country, and of course even as corporate India, and whether or not environment is necessarily in conflict with growth when it comes to revenue or profit projections going forward. We of course have a special panel here to speak us through this entire topic. And remember that there's also been this very interesting statistic that comes up here, which talks about companies, let's say in Europe, which are willing to spend as much as 30% of their revenues towards environmental means or environmental causes, or indeed improving their own environmental track record. Here in India, that number is still limited to double digits, or perhaps to single digits, excuse me, or perhaps not at all. So let's try and grapple with this. The panel with us here right now includes Padma Shri Alyque Padamsee. He's a communications expert in theatre and advertising, doesn't really need an introduction. Ms. Laxmi Dhaul is the CEO of Prithvi Media and now also a filmmaker. So we're glad to have you with us too, ma'am. And of course, we also have the DG Hydrocarbons, Mr. K Srivastava, with us on this panel. Great to have you, sir. Thank you. Some of the scenario that gets painted very often is, you know, one of doom and gloom and this sort of scary proposition that the planet's going to sort of blow up in our face. All of that is true. It's also something that most of us acknowledge, and you know, we're all very happy to sit around a dining table and sort of intellectually dwell on this. But how do you actually get people, specifically in the Indian context, how do you get people to actually do something about it on a personal level? Because you know, we can talk about corporates doing things and governments doing things, but you know, people in India don't really seem to care as much as, let's say, what's happening in the West in terms of these movements.
People in India have very little, the government gives very little information on almost any subject. It is up to the government to appoint a committee that will disseminate information. It's the information gap. It's not that people won't. I mean, I'm sorry to say, but when I wear my other hat, advertising, advertisers are getting people to try new products, new ways of cooking, new ways of this. How is that happening? It's happening because the communication is good. And communication is a big gap in this country, particularly between the government and the people. Take drinking. They've just passed a ridiculous order in Maharashtra to say that only people over the age of 25 will be allowed to drink. Now 25 is, you're married, you may have a couple of kids, etc., but they feel no, they're not really, senior adults who can be trusted with a bottle in their hands. So it's this sort of thing, and it was announced without any you might say preamble. Why? It was never said why, and what facts were they quoting a country to say, yes, in this country they allowed it, and this is what happened. I really feel the government of India is very, very, very poor, and I've said this for, 30 years or more.
But there's one question again that comes up here which is very relevant from everybody's point of view. While I understand what is happening in the area of hydrocarbons right now, there's always been a lot of talk, and now internationally there's a lot of momentum on this whole aspect of environmentally friendly vehicles, fully electric vehicles and things like that. In many other countries, Japan included and Sweden included for that matter, we see government and in fact even departments like, let's say, oil and gas in particular, getting into this kind of research and saying that, all right, what about infrastructure, for future infrastructure for, let's say, electric vehicles? In India, we're not seeing any kind of movement, though there is an auto mission plan. From the point of view of government, how does a department like yours step into an area like this, which is, in a sense, far removed from what you're doing today?
We have in the oil and gas sector, companies like ONGC, IOC, they have big R&D centers. Apart from the oil and gas exploration and production business and refining business, these R&D centers are also engaged in activities like research on fuel cell, research on electricity driven cars. So Ministry of Petroleum has encouraged these companies to, though, say I'm from hydrocarbon sector, if there's no hydrocarbon, I'll lose my job. That's a different thing. But Ministry of Petroleum has given ample emphasis that there should be alternatives. Their R&D centers, apart from their regular R&D and refining and exploration techniques and all that, they are also parallelly working on this kind of things.
All right, and Mr. Padamsee, the need is now though, isn't it? Because in China, for example, you can't get a building license till you have plug points for cars in the parking lot.
Right. And I would say, talking about the Petroleum Ministry with whom I worked just a couple of years ago, PCRA, which is a part of this Petroleum Conservation, PCRA, had a campaign, which I was part of, to save oil, save petrol. But incidentally, that campaign was also saving the environment. So yes, I do agree that some ministries are aware, but again I say it's a communication problem, that you can meet any minister in Delhi and talk about global warming, and they'll say, but we are very warm. Why do we need more? This is the level of knowledge, and you can expect it, and this is another point that I make on this whole interaction all the time, because everything that we say here has to have some replication with the government. And I say, when you have ministers who've come from a farm and you put them in charge of railways, or you put them in charge of atomic energy, or it is ridiculous. There should be in government an examination for any bureaucrat or any minister, unless he's up to the mark on what is the ministry is handling and he knows all about it. Like for instance, Mr. Srivastava knows his subject, but tomorrow you put him in, I don't know, the arts ministry. He'd say, why are you doing that? My speciality is here. But there is no speciality allocation of ministries to any ministry.
Mrs. Dhaul, that is the worry, isn't it? That people in leadership positions today, when it comes to specifically the environment, it's just a situation where they just don't care, or people just don't care. Is that it? Is that really the problem?
I think also when you talk about environmental measures like energy efficiency, controlling consumption of fuel, using, as Alyque mentioned, using efficient lights and stuff like that, all these demand side management, energy audits, all these things come in when the cost of petroleum goes high. The moment the cost of per barrel petroleum comes down below $100,
people stop caring.
People stop caring. And this time we were abroad, I was really happy to see the hybrid cars. in Rome, in Paris, everywhere there are hybrid cars. And they have a very comfortable balance of your cells as well as fuel. You know, and I think unless we go into hybrid cars, and then let each family have 3-4 hybrid cars, we don't mind. But that is a very important thing. But I think unless petroleum, the price of petroleum, of course, Mr. Srivastava would possibly tell us more, you know, is a permanent, and people realize that it pinches. People will not do demand side management.
Right.
And also, I'm a big advocate, I'm sorry, this is a little out of context, unless we control our population through communication, what Alex says, we cannot save our environment.
It's like a domino effect then in any case.
Right.
But do you believe that the next generation that's coming, the kids who you're trying to reach through your film, let's say, do all of you believe that that generation is going to be that much more cognizant and perhaps that much more
Well,
careful?
I think they're already questioning us. Right now, they don't know anything other than don't use plastic. You know, this is a thing that's told to them. But the thing is, we don't give alternatives to plastic. So these kind of cliched things they know. But the thing is that we have to recycle. Recycling is important. And I think children are aware. And once they get into the perspective of things, I hope it's not too late
Right.
for them
I
to
would
make
say that,
something.
sorry, yes, it's true. Children, when we say children are aware, we mean children who are going to good schools and colleges.
Who are being told this?
As far as the major population, 70%, who are in the rural areas, they are totally unaware, and there's no communication at all with them, nothing.
But is good policing the answer as well? Because let's say with plastic bags in Delhi, for example, you know, they finally just had to sort of enforce the law, and now you can't use plastic bags. You don't find them anywhere. Of course, you still find them, but what I mean is you don't find them in any shops, small or big. Is that the way forward, saying that?
No,
look,
one of
clamp down
the ways is the government of Maharashtra, and I must say that's a good measure, has said that if you want a plastic bag when you do your shopping and you want the company to give it to you, for instance, any of the big stores, they've sent around an SMS to all their customers, and I hope it gets into the papers, saying if you want a plastic bag, you will have to pay for it. This size you'll pay 5 rupees extra, this size you'll pay 10 rupees extra, and this size you'll pay 20 rupees extra. Now that is the kind of thing that I think you're talking about. As soon as the cost factor comes in,
deterrent.
yes, Indians then become socially, shall we say, conscious, because the pain is not in the heart, the pain is in the wallet.
Mr. Srivastava, incentives are also another way to do this, because let's say the automobile industry will be very happy if there's tax incentives on hybrids and electric vehicles.
It's there, but at least I've seen in Delhi, I lived in Noida, people have, you know, really very good population is really not bothered. They have 1 person or 2 persons in the family. They have 4 or 5 cars.
No, but as a consumer, if I can buy the same car, the hybrid version and the petrol version for the same price, then maybe I'll think about it.
Yes. Yeah,
So,
it will.
but that needs a
definitely.
tax incentive.
Yeah, that needs a tax incentive.
Now tax
Yeah.
incentives
Yeah.
do work.
Do work.
And penalties work. Singapore is outstanding in having taxes on you know, congestion. For instance, the congestion tax in the center of Singapore. If you enter that area immediately, and they have smart cards, so they know you've entered that area, and at the end of the month you get a bill.
You get a bill.
For having been in that area, and they have lots of incentives and disincentives. Cars in Singapore are probably the most expensive to buy in the world.
The environment, of course, will remain a primary concern for all of us. If not today, then at least tomorrow. It's something that all of us will think about. Thanks for watching.